John, thanks for coming by, man.
Yeah, always good to come by.
Watch out for the chickens.
That one's looking at me.
Yeah, that's Buffy. This is our sentinel chicken right here.
Is she a vampire slayer?
She's actually the nicest chicken. So you know what's really interesting about chickens is that they can recognize faces. They probably recognize you from the last time you were here. And they like some people and don't like other people depending on how they're treated. Like, I feed them constantly, so they really like me a lot. Sadie, our 6-year-old daughter, they do not like her at all.
They don't like having their feathers pulled out.
So she's really rough with them. She'll like grab them and like squeeze them really hard. She'll like throw them. You know, she's not good with chickens. She'll strangle them. And they've learned. They know who she is. They definitely know who she is.
But that could just be by height. Like, are we sure that they really analyze your facial features?
I just read a thing that said that chickens prefer symmetry in human faces. So it said that they prefer beautiful faces, but then the article is actually that they prefer symmetrical faces, which is just a little bit of clickbait there. But so the funny thing is that the chickens have gone from, as they've gotten bigger, they've gone from running away from Sadie to chasing and attacking her.
Oh, wow. So that proves that face recognition can be used for malicious purposes.
There you go. So now Sadie is kind of afraid of the chickens, even though I don't think they would really even do anything. Let's try to grab some chicken audio here.
Come on, imprint on me.
Look at
Buffy.
She's like,
I'm looking at you.
kind of remember you. Watch out for Tiny. Tiny, watch this. She will bite if you pet her.
What are they saying?
They're probably saying, like, where's the food? Right? Because this is usually where I feed them. Maybe the San Francisco government should just use chickens for facial recognition.
I mean, it's a tiny brain. Like, you'd think you could put, like, you know, a couple hundred of those on a cookie sheet, right?
Yeah. Delicious. Hello? Glenn Gruber.
Yep, just had to move around my settings here.
Gruber's got all the bass. Did you hear that?
No, it's just my wife's.
Got a nice large diaphragm.
Whoa, that's getting personal now.
It's a family podcast. Hey, John, nice to meet you. I heard your earlier podcast.
Okay.
Probably like a couple of years ago.
Well, I might as well state the disclaimer right away that our guest today, John Hershey, would like it known that his views do not represent those of Google or of his own mind.
That's about right.
That's about right.
I don't subscribe to my own views.
It's always a safe way to start off.
I'm sort of a devil's advocate.
To yourself.
To myself.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. So welcome to whatever we're calling this thing now, because it's no longer going to be Device Squad, people. Still brought to you by Anexinet, but the news is that Glenn and I will be co-hosting the new podcast, and we're going to integrate the ETC, the Emerging Tech Council, with Device Squad and combine them to form a supercast, right? Like a supergroup. Superpod from Anexinet.
As a leading technology consultancy and reseller, Anexinet helps clients provide a complete digital experience for customers, employees, and end users. We accomplish this through our holistic approach, which encompasses all aspects of today's digital journey, end-to-end. Anexinet partners with top technology vendors like HPE to offer products and services that enhance the digital experience across customer engagement, enterprise mobility, cloud and hybrid IT, and analytics. Because great digital experiences rely on the smooth operation of all interconnected elements. From strategy through execution, we deliver custom multi-channel applications, including web, mobile, chat, and voice. With self-service apps for customer loyalty and enterprise apps that streamline internal processes, now you can reimagine legacy applications to propel your business forward. Anexinet also helps you embrace modern cloud and hybrid IT infrastructure to provide a seamless experience at every touchpoint, empowering you to recover quickly from disaster, scale to meet demand, and automate systems for perfect performance 24/7. And to maximize your competitive advantage, we ensure you always deliver the best experience possible by continuously honing your digital solutions through data-driven insights. So, how do you know if your business has what it takes to provide the complete digital experience? One that sets you apart, maintains competitive edge, and turns users into passionate fans? Simple. Just give us a call. Together, we can deepen engagement and make every digital experience remarkable.
But the point is, we need help coming up with a name. That's the first order of business. So if anybody is listening to this, first of all, and you have a good name that you wanted to give away to people you've never met because you have that kind of a personality, then send it in either to, what's your email, ggruber@anexinet?
Yeah. So looking for, thanks for outing me. It's like, I feel like I'm part of the TOA and now you're like the shadowers.
So send it in, ggruber or sbrickman at anexinet.com. And what do we have for him, Glenn? We have some kind of a prize.
Sure. Yeah. We can always provide a attribution, of course. That's kind of goes without saying. But only once we name it the first time, you will not get a shout out every single podcast episode. But if you are in the need of some, digital transformation or mobile strategy, I think we can give you a free hour of consultation.
Free 60-minute consultation plus attribution. How can you pass it up? I mean, how long does it take to come up with a name for a tech podcast that combines Device Squad with Emerging Tech Council?
Given the time that we spent on it, apparently quite some time. So
yeah, we did
hopefully
not.
There'll be more clever people out there in the podcast verse than
right.
us.
Although Technology KN, I thought that was a real keeper.
It's more of a written pun.
OW. That's the problem with that one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's also, Ben Thompson tried stratechery because he thought that would be like a good strategy and technology. And he, in most of his podcasts, kind of lives to regret that decision almost every single time. So
I can imagine. Yeah. Freedom Gas. That was another one that I proposed. I still like that. I think that's a good one. Welcome to Freedom Gas.
Oh my God.
Okay. So in case you didn't already figure it out, we're here with Glenn Gruber, Senior Mobile Strategist at Anexinet, on the phone. Are you in Providence? Are you at home in Providence?
I am at home in Providence. I actually, although I did think that you were going to say, in case you haven't already moved on to the next podcast, given this 7 minutes of hell that we just put them through.
And we have John Hershey, who's been on the podcast before as well. And Hershey is a machine learning researcher at Google. And we're going to be talking about facial recognition today in response to some news that came out recently about the fact that San Francisco is banning facial recognition technology for use by its government agencies and what that means at large. And we'll talk about what we think about facial recognition and other AI-driven technologies. Right? Good. Okay. So we all know what facial recognition is. We're not going to make any jokes about that. Facial recognition uses deep learning to analyze facial features and then compare them with labeled faces in a database.
That is true, yes.
So what's the problem? So what does it mean when San Francisco, one of the most tech-friendly, tech-savvy cities in the world, is suddenly the first state to prohibit its government from using facial recognition technology. I mean, this is something you might expect from like Texas, right?
You're thinking of it as a kind of a Luddite response, right? Like that it's low technology kind of idea. Let's prohibit technology. But maybe it's because San Francisco is so tech savvy that they're hip to the dangers of, losing your data or being tracked by the police or whatever.
Or yeah, because Mark Zuckerberg lives in the city and they've all had maybe just about enough of that kind of tracking.
That would make sense. I mean, okay, so the ban is part of a broader anti-surveillance ordinance that the city's Board of Supervisors recently approved, and which is going to go into effect, I think, in like a week or two. The ordinance outlaws the use of facial recognition technology by police and other government departments. The ACLU is one of many civil rights groups supporting the ordinance and expects other cities to follow suit.
Not being a lawyer or a politician or any of those things, which makes me a nice person. What I'm not really sure about within the policy is whether or not this is an out-and-out ban under any circumstances, or, much like wiretapping, that under certain circumstance, with a valid warrant, say, the police or someone would have the ability to then look for an individual, who's either a suspect or a possible concern to society.
Has anyone actually read the law? Or
Oh,
I've seen all these articles, but
I have a link to
I mean, if the politicians who are going to pass it haven't read it, why should I?
I have it. I'll provide a link to it. I'll provide a link to it. It's pretty long, actually.
Yeah. So maybe one of our listeners can not
read
only
it.
be the first to read this, but they could also be the same person who named the podcast. But
maybe you can edit in some call-ins later, providing some information.
But that's a great point, though. Like,
first time, long time.
does it make sense to ban an entire technology versus banning a use of that technology? That's a great distinction, because, I mean, what if they were to only use facial recognition to find, like missing children or something?
To me, like this gets to where we're seeing abuse of the technology in other countries. In terms of, there's one thing if you're using it for a defined purpose that we have enough governance in place, no pun intended, to say that, there's a valid reason to try and dig through this data and identify a specific individual. It's, yet another thing where if you're just constantly surveilling the populace at large for, ill purpose, which, there was a recent article that I think I shared with you, Steve, about what's going on, in China. And, amazingly enough, there's this abstract of a white paper, that this group of Chinese wrote about how they've gotten so good at facial recognition to construct an ethnic face data set based on Chinese, Tibetans, Koreans, basically groups that are not always in great standing, to try and target them, some of which are then being kind of rounded up and put in detention. Again, not necessarily for good reasons, but this leads back to an abuse of the technology. And one of the other issues, I think, with just public policy in general can be, that you may even start with good intent. Like even the Chinese say that the reason that they're doing this is because these groups who are, I think some of which, like the Uyghur, I think are Muslim in general, are bad actors, that this is to try and combat terrorism. But there's a lot of things that even if you truly believe that you're doing this with benevolent intent, you can start that kind of slippery slope as to, well, we're only using it for these kinds of people. And then all of a sudden, it's not used in the way that perhaps the initial law was constructed.
Once the infrastructure is in place, then it just takes a change in the power structure to subvert it to some other use overnight.
Correct. Although in this case, it seems that it's the same infrastructure that was in place and no change in power, but they just wanted to do something, that I think most people would consider to be, an abuse of, human rights and privacy, in general.
But going back to San Francisco.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Sure.
If it's in place and a new mayor with malicious intent comes on the scene.
Yeah. So some more detail on that study. And I will also post a link to that study as well in the notes in our blog on Anexinet. It's found in the Wiley Online Library. The title is Facial Feature Discovery for Ethnicity Recognition. It was published in August of last year. And what's interesting is that it was funded by the National Natural Science Foundation of China. So that's already creepy sounding right there. The finding or the motivation for the study was, quote, face recognition has great application potential in border control, customs check, and public security. Meanwhile, it is also an important research branch in physical anthropology. And they were able to do it, right? But the only interesting finding, I guess, is that the holistic facial features are different than the features you would use for ethnicity analysis and recognition. And ethnicity recognition used like a T region of the face, the eyes and the going down the nose, whereas facial recognition, I guess, just takes the whole face. And the application of T region suitable for ethnicity recognition, but not for facial recognition. Okay. So John, where are we at? Do you know like what the state of the technology is like in terms of facial recognition?
Well, I'm not an expert in face recognition, that's what the pros call it, face recognition.
Oh, they do?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a little fancier, but I think that face recognition has gotten to the point where it's better than human face recognition.
Really? That's creepy.
Yeah. Which I don't know if that has any implications for this story, other than, now you've got a surveillance system maybe that has superhuman surveillance powers in terms of ID. It's almost as if when these things get to the point where they're sort of almost infallible, it would be as if you had a little license plate, barcode on everybody's forehead that gets scanned as you walk by. And that starts to get into the creepy factor, right? That you are, trackable. You're just as trackable as your car.
Yeah. Well, the upside is that we no longer are going to require implants into every human to do that kind of tracking.
Right.
So
right.
I'm a little bit happy about that if I was going to be happy at all.
That's true. Tattoos are painful. They can spread germs.
Yeah. And those microchips, they can get infected.
Oh, yeah.
Subcutaneous.
Actually, the other interesting, and this may be an area that you're a little bit more aware of, but I saw, I think it was at I/O this year, that Google, obviously that's who puts on I/O, that they introduced, I forget what the technology is called, where they can take a standard, relatively low res version of an image and then enhance it back to high res. And I think that the reason behind that is that, hey, we're taking all these pictures with smartphones today, which have very small sensors and can only collect so much information. And when you try and zoom in, like you can start to see a lot of that graininess or the lack of resolution.
Right. This is a classic machine learning problem, image super resolution it's called. But it's really just sort of hallucinating the most likely, high resolution image that corresponds to the low resolution one. I don't think you could trust it in terms of revealing additional information about the identity of a person.
But wouldn't this do like everything that we've seen in 24 and science fiction, and kind of Yeah, like
Blade
Jason
Runner.
Bourne. Yeah, where you enhance the image.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Picard says, enhance, and they zoom in on this thing, and all of a sudden it's picture perfect.
Right.
Yeah.
Blow up.
Is that
Blade Runner.
not a version of
Like
this?
that scene in Blade Runner is insane, right? Because it's like zooming in almost to the molecular level, right, from a picture.
They have like 8 fuzzy pixels, and then they zoom in.
They zoom in and they see like a little like tag inside a hair or something. I forget. But yeah, I mean, this is totally fantasy level stuff, but you can't know any more about what's there than you would have from the original pixels if you trained Face ID on the original resolution. Like what you have is the pixels. If you train on that resolution to do face recognition, then you're going to do as well as if you train something to upsample to higher resolution, guessing what the features are, and then do recognition. Like there's no free lunch there.
Okay.
Right. So this is something that we've talked about before, and what John does a lot with audio and voice recognition and so forth, this idea of filling in the gaps with historical data, basically, and then determining the probability of what would be where that missing data is based on historical data, based on other source materials.
Yeah, and what you just said there was the probability, and which highlights the fact that there are many possible high resolution images that are consistent with the low resolution image that you fed in, but are many of them may be equally likely. And so what you really want is a distribution over what the possibilities are, and maybe for different versions of that high resolution picture, maybe there are different face IDs that you would get out of a recognition system. So there's a whole set of people that might be consistent with a particular low-res face.
Right. And I guess we should also be clear, or at least I want to make sure that I'm clear, that when we're saying Face ID, we're not talking about Apple Face ID, which uses all the little dots to craft a 3D image of the face, as opposed to taking a 2D image and trying to identify who the individual is based on that, right?
Oh, yes. Yeah, clearly that's a trade name, and I just mean ID as in identification.
But it's also a very different set of technologies, like taking a JPEG or video image and reading that versus how that sensor works, and how it constructs the face and checks to make sure that you are very different kind of styles of technologies, no?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, there's no 3D sensors in the surveillance systems that are commonly deployed, but there could be. I mean, there's no reason not to have multiple cameras. I think it's just a matter of economy.
Speaking of facial recognition, it's possible that one of the chickens has just recognized a hawk from the sky, which they can do really well, because it just started making sort of a warning box. Buff is the sentinel chicken, so she will bark to warn the other ones when there's a hawk, and it can be like way up there, and they'll know that there's a hawk.
She's just good at recognition, or she's got status?
She has the status of being the sentinel chicken in the flock. Yeah, but they all have the ability to see the light pattern somehow of a hawk flying overhead. It's pretty crazy.
See, this is where like you could have a very friendly technology that warns chickens about hawks, just cameras pointed at the sky, and then you could just have a scent. I mean, it might destroy chicken society, but it'd be very useful for them.
Yeah, and then it like broadcasts the warning hawk sound to the chicken. They all go, "Oh, there's a hawk up there."
Exactly.
Yeah. That would.
I mean, I would like something like this, like if there were like gun detectors or something, and then a surveillance system that would just tell you the number of guns in your local vicinity, and you could walk the other direction if you so choose.
That's interesting.
Seems like there are beneficial uses of such technology too.
Right. So a few things we need to point out. We need to back up a little bit, because what's interesting about this ban is that it really only applies to the 53 government agencies in San Francisco. It does not apply to businesses or residents. So it doesn't infringe upon anybody's right to use face recognition or surveillance technology in general, such as in their own security cameras.
Also, I read somewhere on the internet that it doesn't curtail the ability of the police
So it must
to,
be true.
yes, to look at footage or recognition results from anybody else. Like they could basically, after the fact, go back and look at, shop's facial recognition results for people that came in that weekend or whatever.
So
I guess with a warrant or maybe voluntarily.
Right, and that's kind of like what's been done for decades. Where if someone like robs a convenience store, they'll go in, they'll get the VCR tape back in the day, that was recording, and then they'll review that for evidence to see if there was someone there. Can they use that to identify, even if maybe back then they weren't using facial recognition software to verify that.
the ban also makes an exception for federally controlled facilities at San Francisco International Airport and the Port of San Francisco.
But isn't there an elephant in the room about just video surveillance in general? Like you allow the police to use, massive video surveillance. They can have a camera on every corner recording everything everybody is doing when they're outside their houses.
Camera giveaway program. We're going to give everybody a free camera in San Francisco. Right? That's all they have to do.
Right. Yeah. So, the eyes are allowed to be out there and nobody has questioned the surveillance program itself.
Mm.
Well, I think, again, there's a difference between recording so that you can go back and investigate something specific versus, constantly, tracking and evaluating, everybody. I think a lot of those cameras are used for multiple reasons. It can be how much traffic flow do we have in a certain area, how much, like in an airport, to evaluate how many people are in the TSA security line, so you can post there's a X minute wait. On this line, you may want to walk 2 minutes, like down to the next TSA line for a shorter wait. And then there's things like, advanced traffic management systems where they're also using that to see, are there traffic jams in certain places from a routing perspective.
I think there's no question that there are beneficial uses of such things. But what would you say if I said, okay, we're going to take all of this surveillance footage and we're going to crowdsource face recognition of it, and provide 235 million whatever pictures of people to the crowdsource. I don't know how this would actually work, but you can imagine actually surveilling it and recognizing people using, maybe chicken brains. Chickens recognize faces.
But I think that gets to kind of 2 points. One is how are you using the data? Is it just episodic that you're going to go back and take a look at it, or are you going to constantly be evaluating and scouring the data that comes in? Most of the time, you're not looking at it until hey, there was someone got shot over here, or there was some crime committed. Let's go back to see if we can identify who that was, as opposed to, hey, there goes John. Now John's walking down that street. Now John's going in, to get a cup of coffee. But I think your crowdsourcing thing is also, I think, a really good point about machine learning and the power of machine learning. So in a lot of cases, machine learning is like having an unlimited pool of interns. I think it was Benedict Evans kind of uses this of, where today you can have people say that's a banana, or that's a cat, or that's a dog, and you can have people do that individually. Even if you're paying them a little bit, you have to pay a lot of people a lot of money all the time to be recognizing these things. But if you can train a machine learning algorithm to do that same thing, and you have virtually unlimited compute power available to you, now it's like you have a billion interns at your disposal to really solve any problem.
Right. So it makes the process cheaper, right, to be able to do it automatically. But isn't it the information that is extracted that is the worrisome thing, in the end? I mean, conceptually, I agree. On a practical level, you need automation to do this efficiently enough that it would be effective in practice. But conceptually, the risk is the information that is extracted. This person who is a dissident went here, went there, and now we're going to get him.
True, but then there's it's like anything. If it's super hard to do, then it's not something you're going to invoke all the time. So yeah, if there is, if you're Jack Bauer and there's this bad guy that you're trying to get, on an episode of 24, you can say, hey, let's look for this one guy. You can use, individuals to suss out that information potentially and capture the guy. And then that last hour of 24 goes swimmingly well. But if you have the ability to do that all the time for, the tens of millions of people who might live in a given city, now all of a sudden the bar for that is low, and the ability to track on a much more granular level of anybody, whether or not we believe that they're a risk or complicit in a particular crime, that's now available to anyone for any purpose. And like, I think that it's a different bar, and therefore also a different burden as to to bring it back to the original premise of when can we invoke the capability, like if we had a search warrant.
Yeah, that's a great question.
I just see that there's a difference in making it free, essentially, as a capability.
The other thing I'm wondering is, like, why now for this ban? Because it seems to me that it's like so forward looking. What good is face recognition if you don't have a database to bounce it against? Like, where are the names and faces of people that they're using as their source material?
Right.
Have you heard of the DMV? Got a picture of virtually everybody.
That's the state level, though. Everywhere except for Massachusetts.
All right. So you think they would pull from the DMV?
That's possible. I mean, there's many different sources. There's, APIs from all sorts of different folks. If you look at what, the federal government, at least at different times, has tried to do to ask for, backdoors and access to data about users, and sometimes just wanting free access to it, not for, again, having a search warrant to, for a particular reason. I mean, there's so many sources of data today that, like, I don't look at where would I get the data as the first problem I have to solve.
But it's the data linked to the ID. But I think the FBI has like 250,000 pictures of people probably linked to their IDs. But that's not at the city level. I mean, the San Francisco, elementary schools, superintendent doesn't have access to that. I don't know what those 52 groups are, but
yeah, but I think that this maybe gets back to why it was San Francisco amongst all other possible places who did it first. Is it's typically a very politically liberal area, wanting to be ahead on certain issues. I mean, if you take kind of California writ large, like, one of the reasons that we have better fuel economy standards and cleaner air is because of laws put in place, at a state level in California, which basically said, if you want to sell a car here, you've got to do these couple of things. And, it's a large enough market to be able to drive behavior on a national level, because you're not going to have a separate car manufacturing facility just to service California. So I do think that there is a little bit of perhaps a leadership going on, but they're not the only ones who are doing this. We already talked about China, but there's a program that's been going on in London for a couple of years where they've been trying this out. I mean, they've had cameras for a long period of time because of the troubles back in the day and so on. And I think a recent article that I saw from the Independent said that system that they've had in place has been wrong 96% of the time. So there is also another reason to put the brakes on things until we get to a point where maybe we have more confidence in the underlying system anyways.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's exactly what I wanted to talk about next. I'm just wondering how much of this is actually about the fact that errors are going to be made, and potentially errors that will have grave consequences, and how much are they concerned for, their own liability in that case, and being sued, or just about putting somebody away, wrongful imprisonment and so forth. Do you think that's playing into it?
I'm sure it is. Yeah. Machine learning fairness is a big topic. There's been a lot of attempts to remedy the situation, but I think in general, like anything to do with machine learning, you're dependent on the quality of the data, and without special measures, you will train a system to recognize things that has biases that are included in the data that you feed in.
Hopefully, if you are using this to identify someone, there's a purpose behind it. And then even if, the machine learning algorithm says, I found that person, hopefully someone is going to kind of visually verify of, I'm looking for someone who's 6'3". This person's 5'2". Like, that's totally not the right person. So there's still a little bit of common sense that gets injected into these sorts of systems, although I'm not supremely confident that's true.
Yeah, I don't know if I would share that confidence, but we might hope that people would do that.
So I'm a little confused about the role that bias plays in this. So just a little quote here. So AI researchers and civil rights groups such as the American Civil Liberties Union are concerned about accuracy and bias in facial recognition systems. There are concerns that they're not as effective as correctly recognizing people of color and women. One reason is that the data sets used to train the software may be disproportionately male and white. Now, first of all, not that I would ever criticize our law enforcement system for bias against people of color. Right, that never happens.
I've never heard
that's not a that. That's not
except
a thing.
when I read stuff.
But my question is, how does bias factor into this? Because if you're just like aren't you just bouncing off of pictures of actual people? So when you get the data or whatever, it interprets this face, and then it just bounce it off of a set of this huge database of individual faces, and then it says, oh, here's the match.
This gets to like your training sets, your test sets, and the size of those. If you have 10 pictures of a Chihuahua that you're going to train against, your likelihood of properly identifying a Chihuahua is not going to be as good as if you had 1 million pictures of a Chihuahua. So I think that this is maybe where people are saying that the training sets for different ethnicities may not be large enough to get good enough at it to get to the right result.
Is it also that it's just the idea of finding the faces in this material to begin with? Is that where the bias affects it?
I don't think so. I think from that point of view, you would say, finding 1 out of 10 things is easier than finding 1 out of 20 things. So if there's differences in the population of, categories that you're trying to classify into, then you should do better in smaller sets of categories, right? So for groups that have fewer people, then you should be more accurate at classifying. The problem is in the training data, there are differences in the amount of people of each ethnicity in the training data, and then that can lead to less accuracy in smaller groups because they contribute less to the overall training cost function.
So talking about bias, there's this one article I wanted to discuss that's from the Facebook AI blog by Terence DeVries, Ishan Misra, Shangan Wang, and Lawrence Vandermaten. This article is interesting. The title is, Does Object Recognition Work for Everyone? A New Method to Assess Bias in CV Systems. And just keep in mind that this is coming from Facebook. So I don't know what your own bias is with regards to Facebook's motivations. You may choose to trust this article or not trust it. There's so much about machine learning bias against anybody who's not Caucasian. And this article goes further to show how there's bias in object recognition against Africa, South America, Central and Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I mean, it's not necessarily biased against one group or the other, but like underrepresentation and inaccuracy with certain subgroups, and basically having a non-uniform kind of set of prior beliefs that seem to be built into the system based on the distribution of the data.
Right. It's all about where the source data is coming from. And in this case, almost all the photos that they were using for this object recognition came from Europe and North America.
Unsurprisingly, I guess.
Unsurprising. What's interesting is they also found a link, like an economic status kind of a link. The results of this analysis show that object recognition systems perform 10% to 20% better in classifying Dollar Street images for the wealthiest households than for the least wealthy households. Here's just some background information about what the Dollar Street data set is all about. So this says, to measure discrepancies in accuracy, we analyzed Dollar Street, a collection of publicly available photos of household items that were photographed in 264 different homes across 50 countries. The images were gathered by the independent Gapminder Foundation, which highlights differences in people's living conditions around the world. The Dollar Street photo collection can serve as a public benchmark of object recognition systems that allows us to measure system performance in different parts of the world. All of these services perform substantially better in some countries than in others. In particular, photos from several countries in Africa and Asia were less likely to be identified accurately than photos from Europe and North America. Using the Dollar Street data set and comparing performance for different income groups, we found that the accuracy of Facebook's object recognition system varies by roughly 20%. So
Okay.
that is Facebook's
Yeah.
system. That's what
They're complaining about their own system.
they're complaining about their own system, and from just a couple of days ago. So, I mean, it doesn't mention when they started using this system.
And in some sense, this is not as malign as it might sound at first, because what they're saying is, you know, for the people who provide images to such systems, who are also the users of such systems, it's doing better than for people who are non-users of the systems, right? And who are therefore not producing images to some extent. I mean, I don't know what the exact training they used, but I thought it was interesting that they get into like the distribution worldwide of all of the images and how focused it is on just a few countries.
Yeah, and they do a kind of a nice little job of just summarizing some examples where the object identification failed. So you've got a picture here of some soap from Nepal that it misidentified as food, some spices from the Philippines that it misidentified as beer, and some toothpaste from Burundi that it misidentified as wood, even though that is clearly a tube of toothpaste right there. So that one's a little. Can you see that?
In a pile of sawdust,
and it's sort of surrounded by the adobe mud and stuff.
I see.
In the wood of the hut.
So just because it classifies it as beer doesn't mean you should put it in your mouth, basically.
Right. Yeah. That's a good lesson.
Good
there.
rule of
So,
thumb. I actually don't know what their application is for recognizing toothpaste, but I assume that it's some useful little applet.
Yeah, it doesn't really mention. So the fact that almost all the photos come from Europe and North America leads to a bias in object recognition systems trained on these data sets. And then they add that such systems may be much better at recognizing a traditionally Western wedding than a traditional wedding in India, for example, because they were not trained on data that included extensive examples of Indian weddings.
Right. And this is a similar kind of problem that has been around for a long time in like speech recognition, that, you know, it's very subjective, subject to different accents, and the errors increase when it's dealing with conversations in an accent that it's not familiar with, let alone a language. And a usual way of dealing with this sort of thing is through what's called adaptation, where you want to like slightly change the model to get used to the context, so that the recognition can be tuned to that particular context, rather than having a fixed classifier or a fixed recognizer that is supposed to work in all conditions. Like, I mean, humans for sure don't work that way. You go to another country, you sort of have to adapt.
Yeah.
And so it seems like that's the approach that they were kind of taking in this blog post, where they said, they want to condition on the location in order to sort of remove the bias.
Yeah. Is the only way to realize the bias inherent in your system to do so after the fact? Or is there a way to like predict how much bias you have? Or is it just the nature of bias that it's caused by a lack of source material? Does that preclude the possibility of estimating the amount of bias before you conduct the training?
Right. So, I mean, that's a really difficult question because, to some extent, any kind of classification problem can be broken down into two parts. There's sort of like the information that you have in front of you, like you see a face, is it likely to be this kind of face or that kind of face? And then there's a bias part, which is your prior belief that any given face is this kind or that kind, or a picture. So like if you see a picture and you've been trained on data where there are very few, lemurs, but a ton of cats, like on the web, that you might just be predisposed to calling it a cat because, more than likely you're going to be correct if you're uncertain about what it actually looks like. And it cuts both ways to remove those prior probabilities because, if those prior probabilities are correct for the population you're looking at, they help you to get a better accuracy score, but they don't help in terms of fairness. So, if you were to say, well, I'm going to treat, before I do training, I'm going to balance the weights given to cats because I got 1,000 times more of those in my data against the weight that I give to lemurs. You'll come out with a system that's more likely to guess a lemur than it probably should, given the distribution in the actual data. Unless you live in a country where there's a lot of lemurs.
Well,
I don't know if that made sense. I tried to pull that one out, but got a little tangled along the way.
Think this is also interesting. The interaction that language, I guess, image tagging plays in all this, right? Whether some systems are trained with photos obtained by searching public photo websites using English language queries. This can make it even more challenging to create a data set that's very broadly representative. A query for the word wedding will typically return very different photos than a query for, say, the Hindi word for wedding. And I'm just pulling this from the article. To address this issue, researchers and engineers must make sure their systems are not overly dependent on English queries and labels.
Yeah, I mean, this is just a classic problem that every field has had to deal with, and some of the fields got on top of this earlier than others. I mean, speech recognition, of course, had a long history of doing research mostly in English, and then over the years, as artificial speech recognition became more of a product area than a research area, it really changed so that all the companies doing ASR had to greatly expand their language repertoire until they covered many, many, many languages across the globe. And a lot of research now focuses on how quickly can we acquire new languages and do well at underrepresented languages. And I think that in the image domain, this is maybe coming along a little later than in speech recognition.
Yeah, that's what they conclude here at the end. We believe one important component of making image recognition models more inclusive lies in using hashtags from many different languages for training rather than only English hashtags. Specifically, we're developing image recognition systems that are trained on multilingual hashtag annotations. But so I assume that you would want to have like the largest data set possible. Let's talk about just general image recognition. So instead of like say corporations all having their own discrete database of source material that they train on, that there should just be one universal set of like all the world's images. But even that leads to problems, right? Because then you're just going to slant towards the thing that's most prevalent.
Yeah, maybe towards the overall population. I mean, for a long time, I think the business model for some companies was maybe let's see if we can get an advantage by having our own data. But at the same time, then researchers have a motivation to release data so that they can benefit from the research that other people are going to do on that data and then publish. But I don't think there's been a huge effort, and I may be wrong, in the image domain about having a sort of like giant image consortium that collects data. Whereas like in the speech domain, the Linguistic Data Consortium has existed for decades and has been collecting corpora of data over the years. And, you know, you companies would have, or academic institutions have a membership, and then they get access to all of this data as it's collected and as it comes in. And it's very wide ranging stuff.
I mean, is that a thing that we should be developing, like a Wikipedia, but of source images for image recognition? Like,
maybe. I mean, images are, you know, they really contain a lot of private information sometimes. You know, that your face is linked to your identity in a way that your voice is not as much. I mean, identifying a person by voice is a little harder than by face. So I think people are more willing to give up some speech data than their faces, you know.
Right. Sure. Yeah.
But for pictures of spices and
toothpaste
should be fine.
Right?
Why not?
Moving on to something a bit more comical. This other article that we found, which I got excited because I thought it was from this year, but it's actually from last year. But still relevant to our discussion today. From NPR.
What's it called?
Facial recognition software wrongly identifies 28 lawmakers as crime suspects.
Oh,
so
how do they know that that's wrongly? That's my question.
Exactly. They should put that in quotes.
Yes,
in the headline. But
maybe that's why they're now getting around to trying to legalize face recognition in San Francisco.
Right, exactly. Well, yeah, and it gets more hilarious when in the first sentence, it's turns out that these 28 lawmakers are actually members of Congress. So it's like maybe the software was right.
How many did it recognize as toothpaste? That's what I want to know.
Facial recognition software sold by Amazon mistakenly identified 28 members of Congress as people who had been arrested for crimes, the American Civil Liberties Union announced on Thursday. So, I mean, even though it's a year later, I mean, clearly there's still issues that probably San Francisco just doesn't want to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say I'm pretty skeptical of this article because, like, I mean, I don't think that their recognition product is designed to identify criminals. Like,
right?
It's must be some sort of matching thing where you give it a set of pictures and it's matching.
Yeah.
Trying to match similar pictures.
Yeah, they had a mugshot database.
Okay.
And it was matching it to the. But the thing is, if you're just training something on a mugshot database, isn't it going to, like you said, it's going to find criminals, right? Because that's all it knows are the mugshots.
Yeah.
Right?
So, right. They need to have a database of non-criminals, hopefully, too.
Right.
And it's not just trained to classify whether you're a criminal or not, is it? It's like criminal recognition versus non-criminal recognition.
So this was cute too. The software apparently is called Recognition with a K, R-E-K,
like W-R-E
R-E-K-O-G-N, which has a strangely Russian flavor to it, right? Which is interesting.
Oh yeah.
And then the other thing that's interesting about this, and again, bringing it back to race bias in machine learning, the test misidentified people of color at a high rate, 39%, even though they made up only 20% of Congress.
Mm.
And one of the members falsely cited as a crime suspect was the great Representative John Lewis. So, but again, if they're just bouncing it off of a mugshot database,
who knows what the composition of that database was and how the software was tuned. I mean, I think I saw that it's the response of Amazon was, well, you set the threshold to like only 80% confidence. So, they basically used it in a way where they would get a lot of false positives no matter what.
Yeah.
Not to reduce the worry of bias in these things, but I just think that this particular experiment was, more for sensationalism.
I think you're
than
right.
Scientific research.
Yeah. So the database the Watchdog built was composed of thousands of publicly available arrest photos. It's kind of funny. The members of Congress who were falsely matched with the mugshot database included Republicans and Democrats, men and women, and legislators of all ages from all across the country. Okay. And then the ACLU sort of up in arms about this. ACLU of Northern California Attorney Jacob Snow states, face surveillance technology in the hands of government is primed for abuse and raises grave civil rights concerns.
Because they're criminals. Or...
because the government is full of criminals.
That's what I was assuming his conclusion was.
You're right. Outcry from privacy and civil rights groups has not stopped law enforcement from pursuing the technology. And again, don't forget, this is from a year ago. The Orlando, Florida police force tested Recognition's real-time surveillance. Oh, Orlando, Florida. They probably love it. They probably love it down there. Okay, this is getting too political now. The Washington County...
Just imagining the scenario where they set it up, to catch, customers coming in.
Mm-hmm. The Washington County Sheriff's Office near Portland, Oregon, has used it to search faces from photos of suspects taken by deputies.
Okay.
So,
well, that is the sobering part, that, like, despite the sort of maybe recklessness with which the ACLU conducted that experiment, maybe law enforcement's using it just as recklessly.
Yeah. So now I'm kind of glad that San Francisco is kind of putting the brakes on this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then lastly, Jeremy Scott, National Security Counsel at the Electronic Privacy Information Center in Washington, D.C., said, quote, because of the disproportionate error rate and because of the real risk of depriving civil liberties posed by facial recognition technology, we need to have a conversation about how and when and under what circumstances this technology should be used by law enforcement, if at all. One more cause of paranoia and anxiety around face recognition technology comes from Salon. And this is
out today.
Just out today. John just sent me a link to this article. Facial recognition data collected by U.S. Customs Agency stolen by hackers. I love this subheading. Total surprise that absolutely nobody could have predicted. Personal data harvested from travelers is hacked. Who could have predicted it? Nobody.
Right. Now, I mean, a lot of that stuff exists in databases anyway, because, when they run your plates, they got to pull up your picture and see if it's you. And then since you forgot your license and your registration, they can not arrest you. So, like, there could be benevolent reasons to have this kind of data. But yeah, the doing surveillance and then using it for face recognition adds an additional risk that even more pictures are being collected and tagged with your name and info.
And your license plate.
Yeah, I guess.
In this case. So how was this hacked?
I don't think they know. I think I don't even know how they figured it out.
Yeah. I mean, it says a large haul of breach data from the firm Perceptics was being offered as a free download on the dark web.
Oh, okay.
But it doesn't say how they got stolen by unknown actors. One of the key fears that critics of mass surveillance and the proliferation of facial recognition technology have warned about has been realized with new reporting Monday that a, quote, malicious cyber attack has resulted in photos of airport passengers and other personal data harvested by U.S. Customs and Border Patrol have been stolen by unknown actors. They didn't want to confirm which private subcontractor was the target of the attack, but the Post and others were able to track down that it likely was Perceptics, not Propelics.
No.
Which was my old company.
Perceptics is kind of a snappy name, but what were
Yeah,
they
that's nice.
doing with the data? That's what I want to know.
Yeah.
I mean, they're a contractor, so they're getting paid to do something with it.
Traveler
Maybe that's why they
data.
had it for face recognition stuff. Like if they weren't trying to do face recognition, they wouldn't have had to hire a subcontractor to give them all the pictures.
Right. Evan Greer, deputy director of the advocacy group Fight for the Future, says, even if you 100% trust the U.S. government, and who doesn't, with your biometric information, which you shouldn't, it says, that's actually in the quotation here. This is a reminder that once your face is scanned and stored in a database, it's easily shared across government agencies, stolen by hackers, other governments, etc. I mean, this is just making the case against facial recognition technology, period. Now,
well, I mean, just to be the devil's advocate, doesn't this also apply to any other kind of data like fingerprints and things like that?
Sure, right? Any kind of data like that one that can be stolen.
Although I guess like fingerprints are something you give up semi-voluntarily, like you put your finger on the thing when you go through customs. But your face is just out there hanging out for everybody to grab,
to recognize
or misrecognize.
Yeah. This breach comes just as CBP seeks to expand its massive face recognition apparatus and collection of sensitive information from travelers, including license plate information and social media identifiers, said Giuliani, not Giuliani, Nima Singh Giuliani, senior legislative counsel at ACLU. Quote, this incident further underscores the need to put the brakes on these efforts and for Congress to investigate the agency's data practices. The best way to avoid breaches of sensitive personal data is not to collect and retain it in the first place. Oh, here's another a related piece in the Washington Post. Don't smile for surveillance. Why airport face scans are a privacy trap. So is that where they're getting the images from these face scans? When do they have face scans? Have you ever done a face scan?
No, but they've been rolling them out in different airports to the point where you can use that as your ID almost.
When you unlock an iPhone, your face scans never go to Apple or even leave your phone. But at an e-gate, I guess that's what they call them, e-gates, your face gets captured by the airline and then compared with a face database run by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which reports back whether you are cleared to board, unless you work for Congress, and then you get flagged as a criminal right away. And okay. The big difference, however, is that there needs to be some cross-verification of any face the system at the airport is trying to match. Where do those come from? Writes Fowler.
They call in a person. From
the State Department, which gathers the shots from passports and visa applications.
Uh-huh.
There, it all boils down to that, I guess. In Atlanta, Delta has an entire biometric terminal that uses your face at check-in, bag drop, security, and boarding. It says the scans help board international flights 9 minutes faster, saving 2 seconds per passenger. Wow. That's worth it.
It seems like it's worth it. I mean, there are people who've cut me off to save less than 2 seconds.
At JetBlue e-gates and earlier prototypes, the airline has scanned 150,000 faces in the past 2 years to verify international travelers before they board. I didn't even know this was happening.
Yeah, and all that data is just sitting there on Delta's system, I guess.
Right. And yeah.
Or their contractor.
Oh, Gewalt.
And, like the San Francisco thing, it made it illegal for, the police or 52 other agencies of the government to use face recognition, but not for anybody else who sets up a camera out on Market Street. Like, there's no restrictions on all the other parties who want to just grab your face.
Technology columnist Jeffrey Fowler reminds us that facial recognition technology is unproven and largely unregulated. Here's the reality. So far, airport facial recognition has very little to do with increasing flight security. Passengers are already screened for that by humans and machines, and the face scanning systems end up relying on human checks a lot more often than officials like to talk about.
Officials are covering up the amount of human checks relative to face recognition. I would think they would be wanting to amplify that, that's just an initial screening, and then we actually use a person to double check as a matter of routine.
But instead they're like, oh, no, everything's great.
Everything's great.
Machines are good. They know what they're doing. The technology is far superior in terms of identifying mismatches to photographs than just general human beings are. Oy.
You said the technology is far superior to human beings?
That's what he's saying. That's what Daniel Tansiar, CBP's Deputy Executive Director of Entry and Exit Transformation. How's that for a job title?
I think this is a commonly sort of confused thing, that there's verification where I have the person and I have their picture and I check that they match, versus like I'm going to scan a huge database of photos to find a match.
Yeah.
That's hard for a human to do.
Right. But this says the real-world success rates I witnessed are far lower than the technical match rates of 98% quoted by the Department of Homeland Security to sell the idea to members of Congress and the public. Well, that's good that Homeland Security is willing to inflate the success of the
98% doesn't sound super great either.
That doesn't sound that great, no. At best, it seems gate face checks offer only marginal improvement. So in this case, it's all about reducing friction and getting people on the planes faster.
I mean, this is a case where you are willingly trying to give up your ID. It's not like you're walking around minding your own business. You're getting on a plane, you're showing that you have a ticket, and, they need your ID, and you're giving it to them willingly.
Yeah, we're already walking through that giant scanning machine.
Maybe they can do like love handle recognition or something with that thing. Like, those things don't go away,
I mean, at airports it makes sense. So,
except when they collect the database and then it gets hacked by the contractors. That's the problem.
Exactly. The article that we just talked about, the data breach. He writes here a day before, and on Monday after I published this column online, Department of Homeland Security officials called me to disclose that photos of travelers were recently taken in a data breach accessed through the network of one of its subcontractors. That's not a phone call you want to get from the Department of Homeland Security.
No.
That's one you might let that go to voicemail.
Did you get a call?
I haven't gotten a call yet, but as soon as this podcast comes out, I have a feeling. JetBlue says a non-match can happen for a number of reasons. Maybe the passenger doesn't have a reference photo on file, is looking the wrong way, is too short for the camera, or has grown a beard, which happens, I hear, fairly regularly, that people will grow or shave. What if you shave a beard? What if you had a beard and then you shave a beard?
I mean, just on a bad day, I can look more like a bear than a human. So, I mean,
Wow.
in some sense, the surveillance issue isn't about accuracy per se, right? Like we were saying before, if you had to have a tattoo of a barcode on your forehead, that would be more accurate, right? They could just scan it. Would it be good? No, it still has the problem that you're flashing your ID everywhere you go as if you had like a license plate.
Right.
around your neck, which I don't think we want to be in that kind of society.
So some interesting things to note is that there are currently no federal laws addressing how artificial intelligence can be used. Though a Senate bill introduced in March would force companies to get consent from consumers before collecting and sharing identifying data, which of course they'll just add that to that document they send you in the mail that nobody ever reads. It sounds like either law enforcement will come up with a workaround and they'll just let people create their own private streams and then they'll interpret those, or else this is a real change. So under the new law, any city department that wants to use surveillance technology or services must get approval from the Board of Supervisors. This means submitting information about how the technology will be used and presenting it at a public hearing. Further, any department that already uses surveillance technology will need to tell the board how it's being used.
So essentially, they've just established a level of governance around when you're allowed to invoke it. You're not, from what you just read, they're not banning it ever. They're just banning it because it's Tuesday, and there's got to be a distinct and reasonable purpose for getting at that data and utilizing it in a certain way.
So maybe appropriate then.
Honestly, I'm personally much more comfortable with putting guardrails around the technology, keeping the common good of the populace at the center as to when we are or are not allowing technology to be used, than to just tell everyone, have at it and not have any guardrails.
Right. So they're actually doing a pretty decent job with this balancing act of protecting civil liberties while actually also protecting residents and visitors and so forth, in which cases the technology might make a lot of sense.
Yeah. I mean, which is like very different. This is sort of related from a privacy perspective, but I think it was last week or the week before, like the Facebook lawyer was being grilled and essentially said out loud in his testimony that anyone who's on Facebook should have no expectation of privacy whatsoever, which is something that Facebook has generally never wanted to say, but has always acted as if that was the way that it worked.
And this guy, Joel Engardio, vice president of Stop Crime San Francisco, he just said that when responsibly used, face recognition could be a good public safety tool. The issue, of course, just to summarize, you have the technology, and then you have some kind of regime change, and then suddenly the technology is being used for nefarious purposes. The other issue is when looking forward, you have to consider that eventually we'll be able to track every single face at all times, and you'll be constantly surveilled, and the government will know where you are at all times, much like my wife.
But I wanted to bring up the fact that surveillance in audio, which is my domain, is generally illegal. And like in Massachusetts, we have a two-party, all parties have to have a consensus that this is, they have to have knowledge that it's being recorded, and they all have to agree that it's okay to record it. Otherwise, it's illegal, like to even make a recording, let alone run it through ASR, automatic speech recognition software or whatever, voice recognition, shall we say, software. Like the entire modality is illegal to record. And in New York, it's a one-party system. So I can call you up, not tell you that I'm recording you, and record our conversation as long as I agree with myself that that's okay to do. But every state has a different law about this. But generally, more often than not, it is illegal to record what people are talking about.
Okay. In even a private setting, any setting.
And even more so outside, like just setting up a microphone on the street corner is illegal.
But you can video people, right?
Yeah.
Like if you have a security camera, you're videoing people all the time. Well, that's interesting. I mean, obviously, with audio, there's content outside of just identity.
Yeah, absolutely. You could be giving away information like about patentable, intellectual property and trade secrets
But what if the visual recognition technology becomes such that you can just read lips and then you can just derive the
That
audio?
is a very excellent point. Yeah, I think that is a danger, and that may make it then become illegal to video tape in public, right? If we apply the same standard, at least, that what people say is even more private than what they're doing as they walk around.
So if you're videoing, you can video, but as long as you don't capture audio with it. Is that basically how that works?
Yeah,
I'm
no lawyer, right. So I really don't want to speak on that, but I've never heard of a video privacy law like that.
Yeah.
That, there are cameras out there.
Yeah.
That's not illegal, right?
Right.
Well, we can also always walk around with like file folders that we put in front of our faces. We talk kind of like every NFL coach when they're calling plays.
It may become a fashion trend.
Yeah.
Actually.
Oh, right. Just wear like a mask.
Just even project a picture of someone else's face on your mask.
Oh, there you go.
Saying other stuff.
That's the solution then. We all need to just wear masks that project somebody else's face over our face.
Right.
At all times. So where is this going? So what do you see? Look into your crystal ball and tell me, synthesizing all this stuff together into a prediction for the future.
I mean, I feel like it's interesting to try to resist this stuff, but doesn't it feel like it's inevitable? Like, we've all posted our pictures on Facebook and everything, and like the information is out there already,
That's a great question to end this on. Is the technology inevitable? And what do we have to do? I mean, is the security of the data enough? Like, do we just need to ensure its security? Or once it's out there, is it inevitable also that the data will be compromised?
Yeah, I don't know. It seems like this is a kind of weakest link phenomenon that, if a lot of different parties have the data, it only takes one of them to have low security and get breached and to have the data get into even more wrong hands than it already is. If things are being handled on a city by city ordinance basis, I don't know if things are going to go very far in terms of stopping the massive collection of face ID information. Like that seems to be all prevalent all over the U.S. and in other countries, like say China. It's becoming the norm. Like China is becoming like a surveillance-based country. So I don't see anything slowing that down anytime soon.
On that cheery note.
Every episode ends like that. The real downer. So, John, thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
And Glenn, thanks for coming on as well. And thank you for tuning in to another episode of Fill In Name Here, the Digital Transformation Podcast from Anexinet. That sounds good.
Yeah, but let's work on something that's not just buzzwords.
All right. Send us your ideas, and we promise we will send you something nice. Maybe some kind of National Lampoon crap. How about that from my old days?
I love crap.
Send us your ideas. Plus a 60-minute strategy consultation. Who could pass that up?
All right.
I'll talk to you later, Glenn. See you later.
Thanks, guys. See ya.
All right, goodbye.